Ahmed, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Well, thank you. Uh, Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. This webinar is organized by the Centers of International Business Education at Michigan State University and Texas A&M University as part of our Research Spotlight series. This is the beginning of our third year with these webinars, and today's webinar is our 10th of these series. The topic of today's webinar is qualitative research in international business. For this webinar, we invited three esteemed IB scholars who will discuss their perspectives on the opportunities available for high-impact IB research using qualitative methods. This webinar will include short presentations followed by a discussion moderated by David Griffith, our co-host. David Griffith and I will be your co-hosts today. David is the Holly Wonder Hyder Chair in Business, Professor of Marketing, and Associate Director of Research at the Center for International Business Studies at Texas A&M University. I'm Ahmed Kurja. I'm at State University, and I also serve at MSU Cyber. I'm delighted and honored to introduce you with our esteemed panelists today. First, I would like to thank you for joining us and our panelists for joining us for today's webinar. Our first speaker is Professor Helena Barnard. Helena is joining us from Gordon Institute of Business Science at the University of Pretoria, South Africa. Her research interests are in how knowledge moves between more and less developed countries, particularly in Africa, and cross-national mechanisms such as scientific collaborations, doctoral training, and the diaspora. Helena has published several papers in JIBS, Journal of Management, Research Policy, Journal of World Business, among others. Our next panelist is Professor Eric Sun. Eric is the Dallas World Salute Distinguished Professor in Global Strategy at Naveen Jindal School of Management in the University of Texas at Dallas. Eric's main research areas include organizational learning, strategic alliances, and entrepreneurship in a global context. Eric is a prolific scholar who has published extensively in leading business journals, including AMJ, AMR, JIBS, SMJ, and Marketing Science, among others. And our third panelist is Professor Catherine Welch from Trinity College in Dublin. Catherine's research has concentrated on approaches to context in international business research, particularly the use of qualitative research methodology and process approaches to studying firm internationalization. Her work has appeared in leading journals in international business and management, including JIBS, Journal of World Business, Management International Review, Organizational Research Methods, among many others. Now, I will pass the proverbial microphone to David, who will lead the discussions during this panel. Enjoy.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Welcome. I will simply say, as we're going through the presentations, please ask any questions in the chat or the Q&A. We already had one in the Q&A. I will do my best to organize them. You can send questions directly to me also if you'd like to. However you'd like to do it, to get those questions going, we will be holding those questions generally to the end of the presentation when we have our Q&A session. So without further ado, I will turn the proverbial platform over to Helena to start us all off. Helena, take it away.
Thank you so much. I trust my my screen is shared. So I'm talking about excuse me, qualitative research in emerging markets. And I think it needs to be asked, is it even worthwhile to single out emerging markets for attention? And it really started with a quantitative project when a doctoral student of mine, my own research is mainly qualitative, but this student wanted to understand firms in the formal economy in Zimbabwe that are able to survive that extremely hostile environment. So it's manufacturers of things like cooking oils or really clothing, basic elements. But given the environment, he really wanted to understand what's going on there. He had to visit the manufacturers in person. They're about 250 or were. They keep on going bankrupt. And he did everything by the book. And there's absolutely no doubt that they felt that this is, he's coming, he has their best interest at heart. He had talked through the consent form, and people showed him around the plants. If he asked a question, it would be, oh, let me go ask the whatever manager, I think he will know better. And even access to financial statements, literally come sit behind the computer so that you can see, because I'm scared I'll get the ratios wrong, which, by the way, was very wise, because the ratios, if you do no investment for 20 years, your return on investment is a very weird number. So at least he knew he had the real numbers. But 11 of the firms flat out refused to sign the form. When he left, he's like, oh, I need to just get your signature. He had more that were worried about the government somehow being able to trace their participation that he managed to convince to sign. 11 of them just flat out refused. And we were going everywhere. We went to the university's ethics committee and the deputy vice principal for research and the registrar. And in the end, when we did the stats, we realized that the statistical results are not affected by losing these 11 data points. And so I said to him, let's stop the battle. And I had this cold shiver, because what he was finding was signaling what he was studying, this hostile environment in which firms had to navigate tensions that don't exist elsewhere. And what if his research had been qualitative, where you can't run the stats and see, well, actually, these cases do not materially change the results. And since then, I've been thinking in terms of how do we make sense of working from an emerging market context. And what happens is we have to, first of all, recognize, see, acknowledge, respect the local environment. The research has value because we are trying to understand a hostile environment or whatever the case may be for a particular study. But at the same time, obviously, scholarship is a global endeavor. You have to connect with a global scholarly conversation. And then you find yourself in a situation that the world that you are trying to theorize is very poorly documented. So you're trying to make sense of something, but you don't have that much scholarly evidence for dealing with it. So it felt to me that in dealing with this, there were three core tasks. First of all, we needed to tell the stories of doing research in emerging markets. Not simply because it's an interesting tidbit, but very often part of that story is part of what we're trying to theorize. We have to connect with theory that already exists. Extend theory, yes, but what conversation are you joining and who is talking about whatever? And then we have to be better at extracting methodological learnings so that others can learn from them. So I'll start with extracting the learnings. Methods represent how we advance scholarship. And it's like when you have a surgeon, you really don't want the surgeon to be experimenting with the surgical instruments that she uses on you. But at the same time, you really don't want a surgeon who's not using the most up-to-date instruments and the cutting-edge technology. And therefore, when there are learnings that have been gained through experiences, we need to extract those learnings and codify them so that we are able to say, this practice works, maybe modified slightly, or otherwise we need to develop new practices. So the honing of the tools that we use is actually a project that I'm doing at the moment for Algar, a research handbook on qualitative research in emerging markets. And in the process, what I've realized is it's based on 15 collaborators telling the stories of the projects that they tried to do and how they did it. And they're often war stories that scholars of emerging markets will tell each other, oh, you won't believe, and then what happened? But they're very rarely documented. And looking at these stories that were coming in, it struck me that there were themes. Something like intermediaries are very often important in an underdeveloped context. The settings are often extremes. You have these really inspirational people, social enterprises that make a real difference in people's lives, or you have terrible poverty and corruption. And associated with that, very often a very high emotional content, often distress, that people struggle to manage, given that this is a scholarly endeavor. So it felt to me that one of the challenges that I think we need to address as a field is telling the stories, because unless we can see, okay, this stress dimension is not you being funny. This is actually something that happens if you are looking at hostility and poverty and corruption and violence. We're not going to develop the tools to work with that. If I can talk about a paper that I did with another doctoral student, the returnee liability, we have wonderful JIBS papers about the benefits that returnee entrepreneurs bring. Pamela's like, she's not sure the Kenyan government knows that you were gone or that you've come back. And she wants to understand the experiences of technologically enabled returnee entrepreneurs in Nairobi, Kenya. And this is sort of a Google-style campus that's built by one of the returnees. They often put together these trendy offices. So Pamela started doing interviews with these returnees, asking them about how were they navigating the new institution, the semi-familiar institutional context. People started crying. And they were crying about weddings where the community was angry that they were not funding the weddings adequately. They were no longer living in first world currencies where they could pay whatever amount and it wouldn't make a difference. They were entrepreneurs trying to get going out of this finite savings spot. And they were talking about funerals. She was completely thrown by it. And we actually had to shift the design into more of a narrative design because they were completely uninterested in the institutional conditions they were facing. And it turned out that what they were really grappling with was the fact that they, as individuals who were operating without government support, were trying to innovate. And there's a literature about the illegitimacy of new product development. If you do things in a new way, you're suggesting the old way wasn't so great. And because these individuals had to take on board the burden of being the person who's introducing the change, as well as the burden of a person who no longer can provide financial support like they could when they were earning a salary abroad, as well as the fact that when they left, a whole village had contributed to support them in going overseas. And now the village has had children and grandchildren. All those grandchildren want jobs in the tech hub. And we know there's 3 high-skilled jobs to be had. What happened was that they really were battling to make sense of this. And it's a classic case of micro foundations, which is your personal experiences aggregated end up creating the system. Which brings me to the connecting with the theory. In this case, we were trying a bit in terms between the innovation theory, but personal stories were coming strongly. So we ended up choosing that theory, and it's a management theory. Very often, given that this is so poorly documented, documented we cannot use existing management theories. Things like poverty and distress are not big in management journals. So in an emerging market context, you're trying to theorize a social entrepreneur, or you're trying to theorize the role of micro entrepreneurs, or how businesses deal with dysfunctional governments. Where do you go to find how people are understanding what's going on? And one of the things that we found over and over is that people need to read outside of management research to find the scholarly bodies to which they can connect: education, anthropology, political science, whatever. There are big bodies of work on those topics, but they're not in management. And the example here is the paper I did with my colleague Anna, and we were doing research in various African countries. It was only when we were in Zimbabwe, halfway, so I think we've done 30 interviews by then. And the one guy said, you know, the problem with Zimbabwe is you just can't, businesses need rules of the game, and government doesn't give them to you. So you need rules, and I find that my faith gives me those rules. So I use the Bible to provide them to us. And of course, you hear rules of the game and you think about institutions. But we had to figure out, what's this God part of the story? It took us going back to realize God was absolutely pervasive in the interviews. We, being African, did not notice that anything was weird when an interview started or ended with a prayer. But afterwards, we're like, oh, we should probably have paid attention, yeah? But we were looking at the wrong dimension of institutional theory, because it wasn't economic institutional theory. And finally, we found the sociology of religion. And once we realized that the scholarly body of work that we could use on the religion side was the sociology of religion, and not something like workplace spirituality, which is where we looked. We realized that we also needed to look at the sociology and sociological understandings of institutional theory. So if we go back to the learnings, you need to budget space to tell your stories. And I want to say it right at this point already. When you submit a paper to a journal, you don't get upfront an additional allowance of pages because it's qualitative research, or because it's qualitative research from an emerging market context. But at the same time, I often say to people, if I ask my students from Malawi, from Botswana, from Uganda to describe an American fast food joint, they get it right 95% of the details. But if I were to turn the tables and ask you to describe a fast food place in Malawi or Botswana or Uganda, how accurate are you in describing that? And if you can't form a mind's eye picture, how can you follow the theorizing? So you have to tell more of the details. You have to look more widely to find theory to which you can connect. And then you have to justify those choices. Why this theory? Why these methodological choices? And as a result, I have learned only one thing in all the work I've done on emerging markets, especially qualitative research. You have to have extremely tight stories. This is always true in the case of qualitative research, but it is even more so in the case of emerging markets. And I think I will stop there.
Excellent. Absolutely excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I will once again I'm getting a number of questions from people. Please use both the chat or the Q&A, either one that you'd like to send your questions in, and we will move to the Q&A after our third presentation. With that said, I will now turn the platform over to Eric.
Hi. Okay, let me open my slides. Okay. Okay, so I suppose everyone can see the slide. All right. Okay. So let me start. Good morning. So it's still morning in Texas. So for my presentation, I just want to talk about one key thing is the discovery role of qualitative methods in IB research, and I'll use my doctoral dissertation fieldwork as an illustration. Okay, first I define what's meant by qualitative method, because I think in the literature there are different definitions and there's some sort of debates. So I adopt the definition used by Schwartz and Colby in 1990. So basically, qualitative methods refer to any kind of research that produces findings not arrived at by means of statistical procedures or other means of quantification. So I think the argument is that you look at the piece of research and you find that the core content is based on qualitative descriptions and so on, but you may see some simple statistics, frequency tables, but you won't find statistical modeling, regressions, that sort of thing. So that is what I mean by qualitative methods. And there are examples of qualitative methods like interview, participant observation, case study, allography. So allography is more popular in anthropology. I think it's less popular in IB research. That is, the researcher will stay in the site or the fieldwork for a few months or even several years. But I think case study is the most popular one in management, not only in IB. So my argument is that qualitative methods are better positioned than quantitative methods to do two things. First, to enable IB researchers to discover new phenomena. Okay. Second, to provide a mechanism-based explanation of the discovered phenomenon. Okay, so what is meant by mechanism-based explanation? I have a detailed discussion of this concept in my second book, Explaining Management Phenomenon, published by Cambridge University Press at the beginning of this year. So it's more advertisement for my new book. So basically, suppose we have observed a systematic relation between two types of events. We call input I, output O. Okay, so the mechanism is in between I and O. So the mechanism links I and O together and provides a causal or describes a causal process that gives the cause and views of the process. Okay, linking I and O together. So some people call it causal mechanism in the literature, but I'll call it mechanism-based explanation. Okay, and illustration of a mechanism-based explanation is Robert Merton's well example of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think all of us have heard of self-fulfilling prophecy. So he illustrated that concept. In fact, he created that concept or that theory in the context of Band 1. So I think we are familiar with Band 1. We had two Band 1s in March this year, Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. And so in this explanation, so I refers to depositor belief that their bank is in financial difficulties. O refers to the case that the bank is in financial difficulties. So how do you link I and O together? So the mechanism is when people really believe that their bank is in financial difficulty, so they scramble to the bank and get back their deposits. Okay, and the reality is no bank on earth can give back the money to all the depositors at the same time within a short time. Okay, it's just not possible. Okay, so the bank have to liquidate its assets and so on. But if the bank lends out some sort of long-term loan, then the bank cannot get the money and then cannot give back the money to the depositor on demand. So at the end, the bank will have cash flow problems, that the bank will be in financial difficulties. So that is the mechanism linking the input and the outcome. And I think the interesting is the belief may be right. Okay, like the case of Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, so it is right, it's correct. But the belief may be wrong. But even if the belief is wrong, the outcome is likely to be the same if everybody tries to get the money. So that's what we call the self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, so let me illustrate how qualitative methods can help researchers discover new phenomena. So I'll use my own experience. That's my fieldwork related to my doctoral dissertation. It was done about 27 years ago, so time flies. So my research question is, how do Singapore companies learn from their joint venture experience in China? So the research is about organizational learning, knowledge transfer, strategic alliance, which are these were hot topics at that time in the mid 1990s. So that's a research question. And for my fieldwork, I first have case study of more than a dozen Singapore MNCs, and then I followed by questionnaire survey carried out in Singapore. And after graduated, then I repeated survey in Hong Kong. So for the case study part, I first approached more than a dozen Singapore MNCs. So I into the headquarters, talk to managers there who are in charge of their joint ventures in China. So all these MNCs had joint ventures set up in China. So that's condition for me to approach them. And then after that, I visited some of their joint ventures in China. And then I talked to the expatriate managers there. I talked to the Chinese managers, engineers, technicians, even workers. Okay. And so of course, before my fieldwork, I did some literature review. But the interesting is, in the literature review, I didn't see any discussion of two types of joint ventures. Okay, but I admit that I missed that because I think after I graduated, I know there are a couple of papers discussing the two types of joint venture, but very briefly. Okay, so there are two types of joint ventures for my fieldwork, which I discovered when I went to China. So first, what I call greenfield joint, that's the Singapore MNC partnered with a state enterprise in China to form joint venture, and then they lease a piece of land, they build a factory, and then they recruit their staff, okay, from the labor market. So that's what we call greenfield, starting from scratch. Second type of joint venture is acquisition joint venture. That's the joint venture was based on the state enterprise. That is, they convert the state enterprise into the joint venture. Okay, so the state enterprise may be just one factory, then they convert the factory into a joint venture. Okay, so in this case, the China part contribute the land, the building, some machine, and then the Singapore part will bring the technology, the money, and architect, management skills, and so on. So the acquisition joint venture means they'll keep the existing factory. The Chinese employees, of course, normally they will lay off quite a high percentage of the employees because, as you know, state enterprises, they're usually overstaffed. So they lay off some people, but basically the employees belong to the state enterprise. So for these two types of joint venture, other than this main difference, they were the same in all other aspects. So that's interesting in the sense that it becomes a lateral experiment. So the greenfield joint venture I will take as a control group, whereas the acquisition joint venture is an experimental group. And then I noticed some interesting difference, which is when I talk to expatriate managers, okay, or both types of joint ventures, I noticed that expansion managers in acquisition joint ventures, they were more likely to complain to me that they encounter more obstacles when they try to transfer practices from Singapore to China. So one of the objectives of the Chinese government to have this sort of international joint ventures, not just to attract foreign capital, but also to bring in foreign technologies and management skills. So, all the joint ventures that I visited, the Singapore partner tried to transfer their technologies, management skills, accounting system to China. Okay. But what I noticed is for the acquisition joint ventures, the expansion managers encounter more difficulties. And then I figured out that because for the acquisition joint ventures, they had to go through an additional step, which I call organizational unlearning. That's they have to discard the old routines inherited from the original state enterprise. Okay, so routine you may say in simple terms is practices. Okay, the procedures. They have to discard these procedures, the same procedures before they can bring in the new procedures. Okay, and that is the step what I call organizational unlearning, which is the additional step compared to greenfield joint venture. For greenfield joint venture, they start from scratch, so there wouldn't be any existing routines. So they only have to focus on organizational learning. Whereas for the acquisition joint venture, they have to deal with organizational unlearning first, and then organizational learning, and that made their life more difficult. I mean, the life of the expansion managers more difficult. Okay, this is an excellent quote from an expansion manager. People are very resistant to change. If we say the position flow will be this, we'll put this coding on before that coding, and Chinese employees don't like that because the change in the system of the factory, change the routine of the factory, the change makes their life more complicated. So this is the exact code in English. So basically, the Singapore manager they communicate in English, and also the manager used the term routine. I think that's interesting, but of course it didn't refer to routine in the academic sense, but he refers to the usual sense of routine. Okay, and in fact that joint venture, the product was cans, making cans. So basically they make cans to hold food. So hygiene is extremely important. And then they found that the old procedure, the hygiene standard was below, okay, the Singapore standard. So that's why they changed the procedure. Okay. But there were protests from the employees. They said, well, we have done this for decades, and there wasn't any food poisoning. So why should we change? So they challenge, okay, the change of the procedure. So I think the case is that's really a surprise to me in the sense that I didn't expect this organizational unlearning step. Okay, and in fact I didn't anticipate the existence of the acquisition joint venture based on my literature review, and this is something really new, discovered in my fieldwork. And with the benefit of hindsight, I noticed that okay, this kind of phenomenon, okay, organized unlearning, it's not captured in archival data. Okay, at that time there are different data sets of joint ventures in China or in other emerging economies, but in this sort of data, you won't find, you won't be able to discover the phenomenon, this phenomenon, okay? And it won't be discovered by a questionnaire survey, because when researchers design a questionnaire survey, they have to know the phenomenon first when they decide the questionnaire, okay, to investigate or to examine the phenomenon, the certain relationship in the phenomenon. So they have to know the existence of the phenomenon or the relationship first when they decide the questionnaire survey. If you don't know it, then you won't be able to discover a new phenomenon from the questionnaire survey. And the same is true for experiments. So when you design experiment, you want to examine certain relationships which you know may exist or may not exist, but at least you have some idea of that relationship. But if you a total ignorant relationship, then you won't be able to design experiment to discover a new relationship. So what I learned a lot from this field is that the case study really helped me to discover new phenomenon not captured by DSS, and it's not discovered in the literature. Although at that time, there were some brief mentioning or discussions of organizational unlearning, but I can't recall any serious field of that. So to me, this is a new phenomenon, and then I found some technical empirical support of the phenomenon. And so this is for discovery part, but the cases when I discuss with managers, engineers, technicians, and workers, it's not just that I discover phenomenon, but also I managed to figure out the mechanisms of unlearning and learning. So, for example, I find the older the original state enterprise, the more difficult the unlearning process, which I think is some sort of common sense. So, because if the state enterprise is decades old, then you find that the existing practice has been there for decades. Okay, it's heavily entrenched in the system. It's difficult to get rid of because this will become the work habits of the employees, just like the coding procedure that I mentioned. And then the second is the more social embedded the routine, the more difficult the unlearning process. So social embedded routines, for example, the remuneration practice. So for state enterprise, usually it's based on seniority, but for Singapore, usually they try to convert this seniority-based remuneration practice or appraisal practice to more performance-based. Okay, then that change is difficult compared with you change some production process, which you can show that the new process will have higher productivity or better quality output and so on. But for socially embedded practice, it's more difficult because you convince the employees why that is better. And it's difficult for you to prove that it will be better. Okay, and also there's some sort of vested interest. I mean, some common sense. So if you change from seniority-based remuneration to performance-based, so some more senior employees there, they will be worse off. So of course they will oppose. Okay, so my conclusion is that the basically qualitative methods will help researchers to discover new phenomena, which you cannot do with quantitative methods. But quantitative methods may be used afterwards to examine how far the discovered phenomenon is prevalent. So that's why I follow with a questionnaire survey, and so with the survey I also examine the case of organizational unlearning addition to knowledge transfer and so on. So the second point is related to generalization, how far the phenomenon that you discover is prevalent, that's how far you can generalize your results to different contexts. So that is a big, and I think that that's a big topic, generalization, which I've discussed in my published articles and books. Okay, so thank you very much. That's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Keep your questions coming. We've got lots of questions in the chat. We've got lots of questions in the Q&A. I will note this webinar will be available as a recording after the webinar has been completed. It usually goes up on the Texas A&M Center for International Business Studies YouTube channel about the same day, late the same day or the next day. Please check it out. And Catherine, the stage is yours.
Well, I've got to first of all share my screen. So I don't know. Has that worked? Thank goodness. Okay, I'm trying to put it into slide show mode and it's not. But will this do?
It is on my side.
Is it?
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
see the full, I can
Oh,
see the
okay,
full, so you
great.
should be able to advance slide and we'll be good.
Yes, that's yeah. All right, I'll give that a go. So has that advanced?
No,
Oh, okay. All
sometimes
right,
by sharing again.
I'll try sharing again.
And then sometimes you just have to make sure you use the cursor and tap that screen so that you can then advance it once it's in.
Mm-hmm. Has that worked?
We can see the slides. It's not in slideshow mode, but I can see your 9 slides along the left side of the screen. You're in the preview.
And it's advancing?
No, nothing's advancing.
All right.
That was the earlier slide mode. Go down to the bottom right where you see the presentation.
Yeah,
The
I've
little-
been trying to click on it, but it won't do
Okay.
anything. So
Well, you were good the first time.
I
when we saw
know,
the first
I
slide.
know we were lulled into a false sense of security.
I do have your slides and I can share them from my side if you would like.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to resort to that because I'm afraid my my screen just is a bit stubborn.
Okay, I am bringing up your slides now. So if you wish to stop sharing your screen, I will
I
turn.
have.
Okay, I am moving there. Just give me 1 second. And share and share. Wow, okay, now that does,
Thank you very much for your rescue effort, David.
yeah, but it's not working on my side, I think, because of how you have the mode set up. So let me share and then.
Yep, perfect.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, if you don't mind, yeah. So thank you. Thank you very much, David. And thanks for everyone for being patient. Today, I just want to voice a small warning note because what I've noticed over the past couple of years is there's been a temptation to try to converge on a particular type of qualitative research, a particular way of doing qualitative research. And this is completely understandable. Qualitative research is actually an umbrella of a whole variety of different approaches, and you can use qualitative research for all sorts of purposes. So it's actually quite confusing. And of course, there's always the question, how do we assess the quality of qualitative research, which is something that's hotly debated. So given all of this confusion, people have tended to try to agree on a certain series of steps, a certain way of doing things. And so we've seen the emergence of what's been termed qualitative templates. And the good thing about templates is everyone knows what they are and everyone knows what the steps are supposed to be. The bad thing is that it oversimplifies the whole process. The templates themselves are highly debatable. And also it starts to privilege some sorts of qualitative research over others and in fact restrict potentially the sorts of research we can do. So a whole wave of qualitative researchers in management have become increasingly concerned about this development, about the rise and the imposition of these templates. So they become institutionalized and people get told, this is the way you should do it. In fact, this is the way you have to do it. And I got interested in this topic when I started to realize that reviewers were imposing these templates on people and basically saying, well, if you don't do qualitative research this way, you're not doing it properly. So I wasn't the only one to start to get concerned about this development. And there were a series of panel sessions that were conducted at the Academy of Management annual meeting over a series of years. And it's resulted in a special issue of organizational research methods, looking at the role of templates, really problematizing that, and also pointing the way towards a different way of thinking about what we do as qualitative researchers. In other words, we're not there to follow templates. And I guess it's really been a wake-up call that following a certain set of steps in qualitative research doesn't guarantee rigor at all. So thank you very much, David. We might progress. So that's sort of the background to what I'm going to say. And when I talk about popular templates, it's probably easier if I refer to a couple of examples, and then people will know what I mean. So there are two that are probably dominant, not just in IB, but also in management research generally. One is the so-called Joya methodology. So some of you may be familiar with it. Some of you may have been told to follow it. And there are various ways in which people do it. Very often it's just people are referring to first order and second order coding and data structure. Now, the Joya methodology is a little bit more than that, but that's the most popular use of it. And then there's the Eisenhart template, which goes back to '89, and it has a very distinct view of what qualitative research is and should be. In other words, it's inductive, going from observation to theory. She's very clear that this is a positivist view of research. Now, Joy and Eisenhart very much emphasize the differences between these templates, but they're actually, in my view, quite similar in terms of their origins, and that is what I would call first generation grounded theory. In other words, traditional grounded theory as opposed to the constructivist forms that became more popular after sort of the 1990s. So when I'm referring to templates, you can think of these prominent examples. They're very influential, and you see them quite a lot in IB journals as well. Thanks, David. Yeah, you know when I'm getting to the end. Now, as I said, quite a few of us who do qualitative research are a little bit concerned about the oversimplification of qualitative projects that template use tends to encourage. So the special issue, and this is a summary of it, gives you alternatives. It gives you a way of thinking about, well, how do we do qualitative research differently? How do we engage a bit more critically and creatively with these templates? And if the templates that are most popular really aren't very suited to the sort of qualitative research I'm doing, what else is possible? So basically the special issue was trying to open up the possibilities for qualitative researchers and point out all of the other options that are out there than just following the template of the day. Full disclosure, I'm not a fan of the Joya methodology. I think it's overused. And so that was the paper that I contributed to the special issue. So David, yeah, thank you. So the special issue is there online for people to have a look at. And obviously, I'm suggesting that it is a worthwhile read. And while you're listening to me, you're probably thinking, well, if we're not going to follow templates, what are we going to do? And the special issue is trying to address that question. Now, one thing is that sometimes the template of the day is going to be suited to you. So for some research that you're doing, if you are doing a sort of grounded theory style research project and the Joya methodology does suit what you're aiming to do, well, go for it. So we're not saying don't use it. We're saying use it appropriately. Use it for the sort of qualitative project that really it's set up for. However, there's a lot else out there. So when it comes to international business, colleagues and I have pointed out all of the other sort of traditions like process research that are available to you. And there are exemplary papers you can also use for inspiration. So there's a lot of experience out there on doing qualitative research in very different ways. Also in the special issue, there are authors like Michael Pratt who are talking about how you can actually experiment, how you can use these templates way more flexibly and creatively than often people acknowledge. So you use the templates, but change them to suit your purposes. Now, of course, you have to do so mindfully and carefully, but often adapting tools like this really allows you to show your knowledge and show your understanding of these foundational methodological principles. Now, the third one is that as we've rushed towards a particular type of qualitative research, there are some other traditions that have been neglected. And in the paper that we did for the special issue, we very much focused on the interpretive tradition, which is the oldest tradition in qualitative research, but it has been rather neglected in more contemporary management research. And there's also an article on, well, innovating. In the end, you're using methodology to suit your particular question, your particular research context. And as Helena was saying, you may need to innovate. The tools, the designs, the assumptions that we tend to use may prove inadequate for the sort of context and the sort of question that you're pursuing. So Helena, I was actually quite cheered to hear about the work you're doing to really bring this home in IB research. I think it's a really important discussion to be having. So David, next slide.
Before we go on, we do have a clarification question.
Okay.
Could you please define and differentiate epistemological and ontological?
Okay, so now epistemological is how we go about gaining knowledge about the world, and there are a lot of assumptions about that. Ontological means what is our view about the social world. So what views do we have about the nature of the world, the nature of human nature, the nature of what we study, whereas epistemology is more how do we go about studying it. So is the world socially constructed? Can we, as we try to research, are we just reflecting the reality that people experience? I mean, so that's the difference. Now, does have certain implications then for the sort of research that you want to do. So interpretive approaches tend to really emphasize the existence of multiple social realities, the social construction of the world that we live in, and also the social construction of the knowledge that we have of that world. These ontological and epistemological assumptions, so our assumptions about the world and how we go about studying it, really do then affect a lot of other choices that we make in qualitative research. So what sort of data collection we do, what sort of analytical choices we make. So it really is foundational to the entire project. Now, the tricky thing about these assumptions is, like any sort of assumptions, they're often implicitly held. We don't realize that we have these opinions. And so they affect our research, but we're often not very reflective about it. So they're underlying assumptions that we all have. But until we're actually forced to think about it, very often we don't realize that we have them.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And actually Helena probably is one of the people here who's constantly being confronted by the assumptions that she has. And that's a really important part of field work and doing qualitative research. So Helena might be able to comment on that later. Now, a lot of the confusion that arises with qualitative research comes actually when it comes down to writing it up and coding. So I noticed in the chat there was a lot of discussion about data analysis, and are you going to use certain software? Are you going to use thematic analysis? And again, it really shows that we're often pushed to do a particular type of analysis. There's a lot of excitement about software. So again, there are a lot of assumptions that when you go and do your analysis, you're supposed to look at themes, you're supposed to look at what everyone said that was in common, etc., etc. And I would classify those as myths and potentially some damaging ones. So again, I guess I'm saying there are many ways to go about doing your analysis and writing up. And there has been more discussion recently about alternatives. So you can see from the title of this paper I'm referring to, one size does not fit all. And that's basically the message. There are many different traditions of qualitative research. How you go about analyzing your data, how you go about writing up your study is going to vary. Qualitative studies can look quite different when they're published. And if you want to take a look at some of those differences, I would recommend going back to the 2011 special issue of JIBS that was on qualitative research. And deliberately, the editors published a really diverse range of qualitative research in the one issue. And they really did go to a lot of effort to show exemplary papers from many different traditions, including narrative research, interpretive work, based more on ethnography, more traditional case studies. You know, the whole range is there. And I think it has stood the test of time. So if you're wondering about, okay, what other sort of qualitative research can I do? How else can I write it out? What do these different traditions look like? That 2011 special issue, I think, is still a great resource in IB. Thanks, David. I think we can move on. I think one of the temptations when we're talking about templates, and particularly the Joya template, first order, second order, is that people are looking, of course, to shortcuts, because qualitative research is not easy. It's messy. You sort of get lost in the data, and standardized procedures or templates, like, well, first you do first order coding, then you do second order coding, etc., etc. It is, I guess, reassuring to people that, well, there's a formula. Now, unfortunately, there is no formula. And very often we stop too soon when it comes to our analysis, because, yes, doing thematic analysis and looking for common themes, that's something that you do to manage your data, organize your data, understand your data. But as this quote also suggests, it's not the only thing you do. So one of the key things to remember is that the analysis phase in qualitative research is actually quite protracted. Finding, what the nugget is in your data, what really is interesting, what really is sort of the surprising thing, the mystery, the thing that makes you feel that existing research really has fallen short and that you're looking at something new. It's not immediately obvious, and you have to use different analytical approaches in the one study to really start to understand what it is that you have, and then, as Helena said, how you're going to explain it theoretically. This is, again, where templates potentially send out the wrong signal, that somehow you just apply this procedure and that's it, and you've done your analysis. So that's, I guess, why various qualitative researchers are a little wary of suggesting that all you have to do is sort your data in this way and then you're done. You have to approach your data very creatively, use different approaches and also different theoretical framings. So as Helena was saying, you might be saying, well, no, how can I explain this? Maybe I go to another field. Maybe I have to look at some adjacent area in the social sciences, and maybe that can help me explain it. So you're on a quest, and it's not a quest that simple solutions can really help you with. Thanks, David, I think. So, so what have I been saying? First of all, templates sort of seem to suggest that, well, you just have to master the rule book. And in qualitative research in particular, but I'd say in any sort of research, yes, we have guidelines that we follow. We do have tools, as Helena was saying, but in the end, these tools are always limited. Whatever tool you choose, it's going to limit you in some way. And also our tools can be improved. As Helena was saying, just because we do things in a particular way doesn't mean that there isn't room for improvement and innovation. So I like to talk about methodology as a debate. It's a constant debate we have in our scholarly community about how we do our research and how can we do it better. Secondly, I've issued this warning about thinking about just using a template and off the shelf recipe or cookbook. I've warned that, unfortunately, it's not that simple. There's no silver bullet. There's no easy way of doing it. It's a process of really working through your data and looking at it from different angles using different procedures. And that's really, unfortunately, the way it works. The third point is that there are many ways of doing qualitative research. There are many traditions. So qualitative research isn't just grounded theory. It's not just the Joya methodology. It's not just eyes and heart case studies. There's a real family of different approaches. And you can also use it for many different applications. Fourth, I think that diversity is a good thing. It can be frustrating. It can be confusing when you're entering the scholarly community as a PhD student. But this sheer diversity is what allows us to see things, to discover things, to reevaluate what we thought we knew. So diversity is frustrating, but it's also the essence of qualitative research and the source of the advances that we can make. And finally, I think we will all end up evaluating each other's work. And I think it's really important that we don't impose particular templates on the submissions that we review. I would urge you, instead of saying you should use this approach, instead to ask the authors, why did you not use this approach, and to be open to their reply, and to acknowledge that, as I've been saying, one size in qualitative research certainly does not fit all. So I'll stop there, David.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. We have so many questions coming in. I am going to do my best to serve as our moderator at this point, and ask those questions to our panel. And I've lost my first one. My first question actually is going to go to Helena. So this question, where it is. Okay. Can you please elaborate a little more on how to develop tighter stories in emerging markets using strong theories? It continues. In particular, given that most theories are originally developed in developed economy context, how do you reconcile the discrepancies between theory and observation? And of course, how do you explain that to reviewers? So it's a three-part question to you. Good luck.
So maybe I must give an example. And I think for me, the first thing to remember is that we don't actually care about your country or the firm that you are passionate about. So when Eric is talking, we're fascinated by his work, not because we care about Singapore, not because we care about China, not because we care about joint ventures, but because we are interested in unlearning. And understanding that core, that central thing is absolutely critical in telling a tight story. And when Catherine says you sometimes have to revisit the data a number of times before you find the nugget, it's a process of revisiting and of prioritizing. So I had the chance to do really detailed work on a single case, Sasol in South Africa, which is South Africa's biggest R&D spender. Very strong research tradition, patenting and everything. And the story of Sasol is a fascinating story in the sense that it was started by the apartheid government using Nazi technology, that it worked with German scientists, it worked with some American conservative scientists. It needed the foreign knowledge. Obviously, as apartheid evolved, as the government was threatened, it was privatized. So I had this incredibly rich insight into this firm that had for many years not even bothered to document anything in English because it was so Afrikaans dominated, which was the dominant language of the National Party. And I needed to write a paper about Sasol that mattered to people who did not care about South Africa or apartheid or Sasol. And what eventually turned out, and they did fascinating things. And the central thing that I needed to do is I needed to let go of my emotional and sentimental need to include beautiful quotes, fascinating details, interesting nuances, and to kill those kittens. It's literally like taking cute little baby kittens and drowning them, because you know if you don't drown them, they're going to starve to death later in life. And it's an incredibly painful process of choosing. And no, you don't feel that you're drowning the right kitten at the time. You have to convince yourself that one of these kittens, I have enough food to pay for pet food for one cat. Which cat is it going to be? And so what I ended up working on is how they learned to manage their intellectual portfolio, the intellectual property portfolio, because what happens is mostly foreigners really like to support the creation of new knowledge by emerging market counterparts, because nobody talks about who gets to value from that knowledge. And because they were these sort of skunks of the world, people were quietly helping them to do work, which they then used. And Sasol was making terrible mistakes in how it managed its patenting. It didn't understand where you should patent and what. And they were never taught this by the foreigners, even when South Africa opened up again. So foreigners are trying to make sure that their emerging market counterparts don't really know how to manage the intellectual property, so that as much of the value of that property can be gained by the foreign partner. That's one story. Sasol got all kinds of help from foreign partners, even when it was a very unattractive partner, but not in how to benefit from its knowledge, how to create more knowledge. It had to, on its own, figure out how to actually benefit from the knowledge. So what you can see is that the story has to be very tight. In terms of how to work with reviewers, yes, theories often are developed in the advanced economies. They often are from the perspective of the people who want to take advantage of knowledge and not the people who are trying to safeguard it and benefit from it. But the point is, if the theory works, it should be working when you add those boundary conditions. So I have never yet in my career found, well, the weirdest thing I've had to do was to use stress, strain, fail in the Escape Foreign Direct Investment paper with John Louise, which was in Journal of World Business, because we kept on saying, you know, at first it seems that even though things in South Africa are going badly, it's holding and it's under stress, but then it fails. And my husband was walking past the two of us. He says, oh, that's from science. So I am probably the only person in JIBS with a NASA site in a paper. But by and large, you can use the existing theories and introduce boundary conditions. And reviewers are able to respond to that because Becky Royber has this incredibly useful quote, the weirdness quotient of a paper. If you're coming out of Africa, you've used up your weirdness quotient by that fact. So now you need to say, okay, what theories can I use that a reviewer can recognize? Because reviewers have to judge a paper. And yes, I'm totally with Catherine. They need to be developmental and open to being challenged. But at the same time, they are custodians of quality. If I come up and tell a weird story of funerals in Africa in a paper on entrepreneurship, we decided to play down that part in the paper because we're contributing to one body of knowledge. And reviewers appreciate the fact that you are communicating in a way that is contributing not to your own story, your weird African story, but a story that will strengthen the field.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to direct the next question to Eric, but obviously Catherine or Elena can chime in. The question is, there seems to be some overlap between case study and field study. How would you differentiate between the two? Would participant observation be more aligned with a field study because of the engagement of the researcher? What are your thoughts?
Okay, field study is not a term that I normally use, so I searched the internet and then I found there's a definition. So field study is a research method that involves conducting observations and collecting data in a natural setting. So if that is the case, then case study you may say is a field, one kind of field study because you go into a company and talk to managers in a natural setting. But allography is also a field study. Because for that case, so the researcher may go into the site and stay for some time there and talk to the people there. So field study, I think the meaning is much broader than case study. And so in fact, for the types of qualitative research methods that I mentioned, there's some overlap like interview. Okay, so in case study you interview people, but doesn't mean the interview implies case study. So it's not vice versa. So for example, after graduated, then I have a qualitative study. It's another qualitative research is about superstitious decision making. So I interview fortune tellers, managers, and so on. So I consider these are interviews, but not case study. Unless you say that each respondent is a case, which becomes very odd. And for participant observation, I think it's similar. So if you go into the site, you sit there like allography. So basically the researchers stay there and then observe how people interact, communicate. Then there's participant observation. But you can also go into a boardroom meeting. You sit there and then you observe how the board directors, how they communicate and debate, discuss, making decisions. Then there's also participant observation. So you see, so I think this term there's some sort of overlap relationship. Yeah.
Catherine or Helena, would you like to comment on it, or should we move to the next question?
I think
we have lots of
move
questions.
on. Yeah.
Okay. There are a number of questions that deal with the issue of software, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to ask two questions. I'm kind of grouping a whole bunch of questions. One, is there a preferred software, or more importantly, are there some software that are simply not preferred within the review process that you've seen? And secondly, is it better for the scholar to allow the software to create the themes, including ChatGPT and other AI-based, or should the researcher be more heavily involved in the thematic development aspect?
Okay, I'll take that one. That's first of all, the software doesn't do anything, you do it. So John Van Maanen has a great term. He calls it head work. So he says you've got three things that you do. He was talking more about ethnographic research, but I think it applies to all qualitative research. You do field work, you do head work, and in other words, you hurt your head, as Helena was saying, trying to work out what the heck's happening and what's the storyline here. And the third thing is text work. You have to write it up. Unfortunately, you do that. Yes, of course, you can use automated content analysis now. Software packages are converging so that they do help you with thematic analysis. I hope I made it really clear that thematic analysis will only get you so far. Do not rely too heavily on one mode of analysis, because you have to, best way to really start to understand your data is to look at it from different viewpoints, using different forms of analysis, and trying on different theoretical lenses, as Helena was saying. Now, in the end, you have to tighten it, but you have to go through these different cycles. You know, what if I view it from this point of view? What does this theory tell me? What if I don't just sort my data thematically, but sort it chronologically? So I think you have to go through these different cycles before you really start shaking up your initial understanding, because where you start out is not going to be where you end up. And so your analytical process, your head work is about really trying to avoid just imposing, you know, the obvious themes and the obvious explanations on your data, because then people will look at what you've done and say, well, you've got some nice categories here, but it's not interesting.
Excellent. Helena?
Yeah, one of the things that surprised me in the research handbook that we're working on, and then did not surprise me, is how much of the data that people were encountering was visual data. So over and over again, people were using billboards, they were using notices in factories, they were using photos that people took or pictures that people took. And if you think about it, if you're working in a context where a lot of people are not literate, that is how they are going to be communicating. And one of the big fears that I have is we are moving as a society. In a society, you look at your standard WhatsApp chat, you know, half of it is emojis. So we are moving into a space where we are communicating more visually. And at the same time, we are, as qualitative scholars, really prioritizing not even the spoken word, because people transcribe and then they analyze. So you lose the hesitations, you use, so it's the written words that we are prioritizing. And it makes me very nervous. I think we are impoverishing the data that we're allowing ourselves to analyze.
The next question, and I see this in the review process a lot. Can you share any advice on making a single company case study based phenomenologically published in a leading journal? So a single case study, what are the things that someone could do to move those into the higher journals? Who'd like to start? Anyone like to take that?
I'm talking a lot. So I don't mind going. The first thing is, I don't think it is about a single case. I think qualitative research it's not a normal distribution of papers on this side of the distribution get in. You either know how to do it well or you don't. So it's a bimodal distribution, to use stats language. I think it has to be a case that matters for something. So it's really, I mean, the Sasol example that I gave mattered because it was the biggest R&D spender in South Africa. And if anybody knew how to benefit from patents, it would be them. It doesn't have to be a big company, but it has to be something that actually matters. And then the theory that it showcases has to be something that matters beyond itself. So in the end, you know, there are just so many companies with Nazi links and apartheid links and terrible links. And it felt to me, talking to the whole issue of benefiting from intellectual property, is something that would actually matter to the field. So very often qualitative researchers, I get the sense that they're doing this as a form of extended academic therapy. They want to understand something that they are passionate about, but the field has to feel and has to be convinced by you that it matters what you are doing. And for me, it's that shift to get out of your head into the head of a reader who's trying to understand, to find a building block for their argument. not to understand this, it's like new moms and their babies. It's like, it's a beautiful baby for you, but for the rest of the world, it looks like just another baby. So how do you make to make that shift so that everybody wants to look at this particular baby that was born in this unusual way or whatever?
I'd add to that, and look, you've got some very evocative images there, actually, Eleanor, in what you're saying. But I'd add to that if you look at GIBS, you'll see that one of the changes that's happened with qualitative work that has been published in the last couple of years is more single case studies being published. So there are a lot of examples out there. And it's often, again, because of the different traditions of qualitative research. If you're not doing a sort of Eisenhardt style multiple case study, well, you're quite likely to choose a single case study. So that could be, for example, if you're doing an ethnography, or very often a single case study is used if you're doing process research. So you're looking at how things change over time. So again, it comes down to why you're doing it. Why do you want to produce a single case? What do you get out of it? And there's plenty you can get out of it. So one of the things that colleagues and I did quite early on is that we had a look at the dominant sort of qualitative research that was being published in international business. And we found, unsurprisingly, that there was a depth-breadth trade-off, that the studies that were single cases or a single N of something actually had way richer data than multiple case studies. So if you add on a case, you tended to have then less richness per case. And that's the practical dilemma that we face. So using that richness to your advantage, whether it is, the length of time you've spent in the field because you've been embedded there, you've been doing participant observation, or if you're extending the time period that you're investigating and looking at how events unfold over time, that's really two examples of how you can benefit from doing a single case study, but you've got to use it well. You've got to use the richness well, and argue as to why it's a single case study. But it's not the drama that it used to be, to try to get it into top journals, I would say.
There have been a number of questions about the issue of the pushback in the review process from the template approach. I would say when you're looking at the leading journal in our field, which is the Journal of International Business Studies, we are very open to methodologies and we don't force templates. And Catherine actually sits on the committee that deals with methodology issues as papers come in. So know that your paper would be treated appropriately and not forced upon a specific method. However, we are still dealing with reviewers who do view that. We are coming to the close. I'm sorry we could not get to everyone's question. We had so many questions, such an active group. Thank you so much for all of your questions within the chat and within the Q&A. I want to thank the three excellent speakers for today. I also want to give a shout out to Katie Lane, who is the cyber director here at Texas A&M, who has facilitated the entire platform experience webinar today. Amit, would you like to say a few closing words? You are muted.
Still learning. David, thank you so much. You're such a great host. And of course, Katie, thank you for making this possible for all the participants and for us. This was really a great discussion. And of course, a great thank you for our panelists. This was really a very interesting discussion, and I've learned a lot about the qualitative approaches. As an empiricist, as a meta-analyst, I think, I have a lot to learn from qualitative approaches as well. So these are useful insights, tips, a lot of interesting tips, issues related to qualitative research, the review process. So, well, I personally appreciate this a lot, and I'm sure our participants have really enjoyed. Thank you again for joining us today. And we're looking forward to seeing you again in one of our events in the future. Just a quick reminder, we have another event, Research Spotlights event, coming on November 3rd. This is the second this semester. And it's going to be the 11th Research Spotlight. And the topic is going to be meaning of brands in an increasingly complex world. That's another Friday, November the 3rd. And I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion as well. Again, thank you for joining us, Catherine, Helena, Eric, and well, it's always a great pleasure to host these events with David and Katie. And thanks for the participants for joining us as well, and hope to see you in another event.
And the recording of this presentation, this webinar, will be available at the Center for International Business Studies at Texas A&M University's YouTube channel, which was earlier posted in the link. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Helena. Thank you, Eric. Wonderful presentation. Everyone have a great day, evening, etc. Y'all take care now.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.